The Metropolitan Transportation Authority is one of New York's oldest subway systems. Dating back to 1904, the MTA has been transporting passengers in all five boroughs for over 120 years. With New York's constant increase in population, the MTA has been developing ways to transport larger amounts of riders, especially their subway cars. From 20th century wooden gate cars to the newest 21st century new tech trains such as the R211. Not only is there development, but also history, and history is held in the New York Transit Museum. Open to the public since 1976, the museum has been home to many iconic vintage subway cars, dating to as far back as 1907. Not only is the museum here to store these cars, but also to preserve them. Many of these vintage subway cars have been fully restored to operation and have been running excursions and events for decades. One of their well-known events, which we will be attending today, is the Parade of Trains. This event is a 2-day free event that gives riders the experience of how it was to ride 20th century vintage cars on the Brighton line between Kings Highway and Brighton Beach. For this year's event, the museum has brought out 3 vintage concerts. These concerts include 1907 Brooklyn Rapid Transit gate cars, 1914's BMT Standards, (1930s) Arnies and a brand new version of the Train of Many Metals, featuring the recently retired R32s. This video will consist of rides, railfans,
over there, like during high school.
whistle/horn shows, and behind-the-scenes yard moves. This compilation includes combined clips from both Day 1 and Day 2, and at popular railfan spots such as Kings Highway, Neck Road, Sheepshead Bay, and Brighton Beach. So sit back, relax, and enjoy 20th century vintage subway cars riding the rails again. We start off at Kings Highway, one of the terminals for the Parade of Trains. This is where trains both arrive and depart for Brighton Beach and from Brighton Beach.
Off to a great.
Yo, those two mother.
Let's face it, anytime Arthur is on the route. I knew he looked nice.
Gates are leaving. Gates are leaving. We're gonna go to the R11. Yeah. Nah, get the front. Wow.
We are now at Neck Road, another popular rail fan place to record these vintage subway cars. At this spot, we get to see the vintage subway cars at high speeds on the express track. We now arrive at Sheepshead Bay, another popular rail fan spot to catch the parade of trains. We now move to Brighton Beach, one of the last terminals for these vintage rides, and where the vintage trains board passengers at too. On day 2 of the event, we arrive at Brighton Beach Station, where we see the free car concerts AB Standards, but prepping for the event before it starts.
Y'all here for the event too? Y'all here for the event too?
The next stop is
Following the dual contracts in 1913, calling for a major expansion, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit, now the BMT, need It's ordered new and longer 67-foot-long cars to handle passengers in the underground. A total of 952 AB or BMT standards were built by the American Car Foundry and pressed steel between 1914 and 1924. Operating for 54 years, the standards were retired and replaced by newer cars such as the R27s, R30s, R32s, R40s, and R42s. Currently, only 5 cars are preserved in New York, and numbers 2390, 2391, and 2392 being owned and fully restored to operation by the museum. Number 2204 is on SAG display at the museum, and number 2775 is owned by the Shoreline Trolley Museum. Here we see a 4-car R9 consist. These were supposed to run in the event, but due to lack of employees and it having issues, the R9s did not run for both day 1 and day 2 of the event. But let's still talk about them. A usual consist of R9s would include R1s, R4s, R6s, R7As, and R9s. Currently, the consist contains R1s number 301 and 381, R4 number 1300, and R9 number 1802. These are 4 of 20 R9s preserved in New York. Built between 1930 and 1940 by the American Car Foundry, pressed steel, and Pullman Standard, these R9s operated for the IND until 1977, when retired and replaced by newer cars such as the R40s, R42s, R44s, and R46s. Only 20 of these cars are preserved, 11 of them being sold to various places, and 9 of them being owned and operated by the museum. Their most notable excursions is the annual holiday train during the winter season, operating in areas such as Rockefeller Center, Herald Square, and Bryant Park. The current operational R9s include R1s number 100, the first ever build, 103 and 381, R4s number 401 and 484, R6s number 1000 and 1300, R7A prototype number 1575, and R9 number 1802. Due to issues that crews were having with the R9s, like I stated earlier, employees had to kick passengers off the R9s that were expecting it to run today. So instead, the museum has brought out their trendy many medals again and put the R9s back to the siding. Let's now get on some rides. This clip right here is from Kings Highway on the first day. We are currently on the Train of Many Meadows inside of the R32s. This consist includes R32s number 3360 and 3361. These R32s were one of the first ones ever built in 1964 by the Bud Company and are painted in pre-General Overhaul silver and blue paint scheme. These two R32s were the same color at their final run in 2022, which was a all-day Super Express Q train from Brighton Beach to 96th Street, officially retiring all R32s from that day on. Only 11 of these cars are preserved and operated by either the Trains Museum or for NYPD training. The R32s are one of the oldest operated subway cars ever in the system, lasting for 58 years until retirement. Originally in 2009, Phase 2 rebuild R32s were starting to be removed from service. The Phase 1 R32 rebuilds were going to be next and last ones to be removed. However, the MT decided not to retire and because of issues they were having with their R44s. So the MT extended the R32's life for an extra decade. Ultimately, the R32s were sadly retired and replaced by newer R160s, R179s, and R211s in 2022. The museum hosted a farewell run for the R32s from December 2021 to January 9th, 2022, when it made its last run on the queue, officially retiring the R32s of 58 years in service. Currently, 22 R32s are preserved, 10 of them being used as work trains, and 11 still being in operation for either events or NYPD training. Being one of the oldest running subway cars of the museum's collection, we have the Brooklyn Rapid Transit gate cars, numbers 1273, 1404, and 1407. Built in 1907, these cars were inherited by the steam era of the subway system. Before multi-unit door control, there had to be conductors on every gate of the cars, opening and closing for passengers to enter and exit. These cars would be replaced by more advanced AB standards in 1913, ending the production of B gate cars. In 1938, 3 BUs were converted into Q-type cars to carry passengers to the 1939 New York's World Fair. After the World's Fair, the Q-types were converted back to their original BU gate car form by the Coney Island Overhaul Shops for the Trains Museum in 1979. Currently, 10 BUs are preserved in New York, and numbers 1273, 1404, and 1407 are the only free surviving BU gate cars in operation.
Oh no! One guy wasn't holding on and he fell against somebody and they hit the window and the other one car up.
Running a 1904 BRT.
For our next ride, we're on the Train of Many Meadows, heading southbound to Kings Highway. So, let's talk about it. The first cars we're on are the R10s, numbers 3184 and 3189. These are the only two last surviving R10 types of their class. Built from 1948 to 1949, a total of 400 R10s were built by the American Car and Foundry in two versions, GE powered units and Westinghouse powered units. These cars outlasted many other older Smiths cars such as the R11s and R16s, lasting until the late 80s, retiring in 1988 and being fully withdrawn in 1989. The R10s were replaced by the R40s, R42s, R44s, and R46s. 3187 and 3189 are the only two surviving R10 subway cars owned and operated by the museum. Fun fact, being known for their speed, the R10s were called Thunderbirds. The next train on this consist is the R16, number 6387. A total of 200 R16s were built by the Bud Company, and two versions of the R16 were built, one being GE powered and one being Westinghouse powered. Although both Westinghouse and GE cars could be operated together, GE's R16 seemed problematic, with low voltage resistors and frequent master control shortages. The GE R16s were retired and scrapped earlier than the Westinghouse R16s. These cars were replaced by the newer R46s, but due to the 46s having earlier problems with cracks in their trucks, both the GE and Westinghouse R16 had an extended life until 1983, and the GEs were retired. And in 1987, the Westinghouse R16s were retired. Currently, 4 R16s are preserved in York, and R16 number 6387 is owned and operated by the museum and is the only one in operation. And for our final car on the consist is R11, number 8013. 8013 is the only surviving example of the R11 class. Built in 1949 by the Bud Company, a total of 400 R11s were supposed to be built for the 2nd Avenue subway project. However, because of the cancellation of that project, only 10 R16s were built, numbers 8010 to 8019. These cars were used as test trains for the new technology that MTA was going to install for future SMEET cars. These cars were named $1 Million Train, since each car built cost $100,000. However, because of all the special components of the R16, maintenance of these cars were often time-consuming and difficult, requiring special skills. This led to the R11s being retired in 1977 following a yard accident, and all were scrapped but one, number 8013. Being preserved in 2013, the R11 has been part of the Train of Many Meadows for years.
haven't seen this since like January. That's the range. Yeah, all this other stuff is something like that. It's steel on steel. Weights are steel to the wheels. Iron on iron. No, that's not you have a little bit of yeah, you know, I have a lot of that. We're saying yeah. Nah, but it's goes on. Wait, at least it's not actually on these. Yes, they are. Stay on though, guys. Stay on it. No, I'll stay on. Oh, they're open.
The seat was more side by side. Not like they see it.
For our last ride of the event, we will be boarding and riding the AB Standards.
Taking a picture.
Hello, everyone.
It's not funny at all.
I've been to the museum, but it's like you can't like store it. I've been to the museum before, but you can't really store it in the well.
И все. Там, вот там. Ты мне еще вот там уберешь, ты еще меня пахнешь по голове несколько раз. Так я и говорю. Если бы не ударились бы, ты мне еще ребро сломала.
Oh man, they're taking off the poster.
Чтобы вообще точно не легало.
It only runs.
Here we see the last run of the event as the BU gate cars enter Brighton Beach.
Those fit on the division. They ran up to level well. I remember them after level well. I was at
After the BUs entered Brighton Beach and all the passengers were boarded off, the vintage trains all headed to Sheepshead Bay to couple up and deadhead back to Coney Island Yard.
they cracked the windows. And there you see they cracked it. See what they did? They cracked the window. You saw that, right?
Got it on film.
Yeah. That's why I get happy when I go back to the yard. I don't trust them out here. I get very nervous, you know what I mean? Very nervous. Now that they closed down, I'm not nervous. I can't trust the people.
Here we see the Arnies coming out of the side to also deadhead to Sheepshead Bay and to couple up and deadhead to the Coney Island Yard.
First one that we got on the 30s one, and you took the one we just got off of, like, whatever the 40s one. But it's got the same seating, it's got, like, built-in seats, it's just such a weird amalgamation of trains.
The place where we'll be catching the deadhead move will be at Coney Island Station, where the train will bypass the station and switch over to the yard. Excuse me, like,
Excuse me.
goodbye.
What the fuck is going on?
Before this video ends, I just wanted to give a shout out to railroad content creator Delayed in Blog Production. He is what inspired me to do the narration for this video. I also wanted to thank other railroad content creators that I will put up on the screen for trying to get more of the visuals and like scenery of the area that I was in of the train. So let me know how you like this sort of style of video and if I should keep doing it. And I'll see you guys next video.